It's not an exaggeration to say that the Edsel was the biggest and most public mistake to come out of Detroit since that time that Charles Bowles got elected in 1929, and trust me, look that one up. The swirl of information on Ford's biggest failure covers everything from facts to conspiracies, and still doesn't cover the real reason Edsel was such a commercial flop. In this video, we're going to go over the main reasons that the brand isn't around anymore. So let me set the stage for you. The post-war economy was booming, especially for automotive sales. And all through the 50s, the cars were just getting bigger, flashier, and gaudier. General Motors was effectively the undisputed champion of car sales at this point, and competitors such as Ford Motor Company were craving a slice of that pie. Ford spent years honing their market research, planning, and development, and using that information, decided to target a hole in the market that their family of cars was currently missing: a mid-tier, affordable car for the average businessman. Ford brand's lineup consisted of Lincoln, as a direct competitor to GM's Oldsmobile and Buick; Mercury, which was a mid-tier car that was favored by the younger hot rodding generation; and then the Fords themselves rounding out the lower-end, more budget cars. The approach was two-pronged. Ford would add the Edsel, targeting a young executive, or basically your mid-20s supervisor, and then the Lincoln Continental, a luxury edition aimed at competing with Cadillac. The naming of the Edsel brand was not a simple job, as the company that was tasked with developing the name instead provided a list of 6,000 options, only really managing to piss off the entirety of the marketing department. And that's kind of the same thing as going to your mechanic friend and asking, "Hey, what kind of car should I get?" and receiving a reply of, "I don't know, the kind with wheels." Not overly helpful. The Edsel moniker itself actually resulted from Henry Ford II's absence from a board meeting, and upon Henry's return, he was adamantly opposed to the name. To understand why, though, we're going to need a little bit more context. Henry Ford started the company and was notorious for ruling with an iron fist, even going so far as to restrict his own son's contributions. His son Edsel took over the company and ran it to pretty great success for a short while before passing away at a young age to cancer. He handed the company off to his inexperienced son, Henry Ford II, the one that everyone knows from Ford versus Ferrari. Henry II wanted to respect his father's legacy and believed that tying a new and untested brand to his father's name would be pretty distasteful. But it was that same name recognition that led the board to suggest the name. They believed that tying the brand to a Ford family member would evoke a feeling of public trust. Just imagine being the guy that suggested the name after the whole thing fell into shambles. He probably didn't get invited to golf with Henry II anymore. With the name settled, the cars themselves started to take shape. From the list of 6,000, 4 names were chosen to be the models of Edsel's releasing. They were the Ranger, the Pacer, the Corsair, and possibly the worst car ever named, the Citation. It's almost as if naming a car after a bad case of forgetting that traffic citations exist is gonna set a negative tone or something. With the cars all settled and named, the marketing department got to work, and work they did on one of the most overhyped product launches ever, and the first nail in the coffin with which the Edsel brand still resides. Publicly revealed in September of 1959, the Edsels were publicly criticized for their futuristic styling and their bold design choices. In October of the same year, an hour-long TV special called The Edsel Show aired, bringing with it a whole host of the biggest names out there, including Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Rosemary Clooney, Louis Armstrong, and even Bob Hope as a mystery guest. The one-off show even managed to push The Ed Sullivan Show, one of the most popular TV shows of the time, out of its primetime slot for that week. Mixed into the TV special was about 2.5 minutes of actual car reveal, barely managing to keep the audience awake till the next musical. And the part that I find almost comical about the whole thing is, due to the use of grayscale TVs at the time, the announcer showing off the cars even had to describe the colors, which is always a treat. At the end of the day, the TV special didn't do much to dissuade the public's disinterest in the styling of the Edsels. The next big nail in the coffin of the Edsel brand came in the form of the recession of 1958, where the largest market impacted was the automotive industry. Sales absolutely plummeted, going from a nationwide 8 million car sales annual in 1955 all the way down to 4.3 million car sales in 1958. That's almost a 50% reduction of the entire automotive industry. Contrary to the name, the economy actually crashed in August of 1957, only a couple of months before the new model year cars were to be released to the public. This recession marked the end of the post-war industrial boom and really was kind of just a perfect storm for the entire Edsel brand. Ford had been targeting high initial sales, and after their first year of business, they ended up getting the title of the second most successful automotive brand at launch, only narrowly placing behind DeSoto. The following years didn't share the same story, however, with sales falling off rapidly, from 66,000 car sales in 1958 down to 44,000 car sales in 1959, and only roughly 2,800 car sales the following year. This would end up being a sales slump that Edsel wouldn't recover from. Edsel had targeted a hole in the market, but had forgotten about the giant that is General Motors and the brands that they already had in the space. Ford tried to fill the gaps in the market with their new offerings, but only ended up confusing their own buyers, who couldn't tell if a Edsel was supposed to be better or worse than a Mercury. The final nail in the coffin, almost ironically, came from the very first mistake Ford made. Throughout the 50s, cars had gradually become the land yachts of Americana and mid-century families everywhere. However, with all of the research that Ford had invested in to predict the next best style, they'd forgotten to take into account changes in public preference over time. As the Edsel lineup was releasing, the target audience of the young executive had really split in two directions, either spending a little bit more money to get a nicer and classier Buick, or cutting costs to get a smaller and more economic compact car. Beyond just the market shift, the Edsels pretty quickly gained a reputation as dressed-up Fords with low build quality. Later exemplified by Rosemary Clooney herself, as she recounted the story of the first time she saw an Edsel while preparing for the Edsel show. The show was built around the newest Ford offering, the 1958 Edsel, a new vista of motoring pleasure, unlike any other car you've ever seen. The only Edsel I ever saw was the one they gave me to drive while I was rehearsing. I came out of the CBS building, up those little steps to the street where my purple Edsel was waiting, like the Normandy in dry dock. Mr. Ford was right behind me, heading for his Edsel. I opened the door of my car, and the handle came off. I turned to him, holding it out to him. About your car. In the end, Ford lost over $200 million, which, adjusted for inflation in 2024, is over $2.5 billion. Turns out, you can't really buy recognition, even if you have all the biggest names in show business come out to do your little show. Rosemary Clooney is a funny lady.